So we are here to talk about the modern digital estate for government, and thank you to Julian and Sarah for setting the scene there for us. We got the memo, Julian, on the blueprint to brilliance, so I think we'll be bringing some of that out as we speak today. So let's start with some introductions then. My name's Adele Every. I'm the Managing Director for the Public Sector Business at Cisco. Let me move now to my panel to introduce themselves. And perhaps, panel, while you're introducing yourselves, please set the scene with sort of 3 words on how you would describe the blueprint for digital government and your hopes. So, Sonia, let me start with you.
Thank you. So, pleasure I managed to actually get here today. So I'm Sonia Patel. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the NHS. I've spent best part of 20 years driving sort of digital and technology transformation. My role at the moment oversees the technology strategy for healthcare, also driving the kind of architectural practice across our transformation plans aligned to the 10-year vision, and also ensuring that we're kind of building with standards in space. So 3 words for me would be person-centred architecture. So as we move into building the smarter state, it's super important that we're not building around organisations and functions, but that we're truly building services that meet the needs of the public, the population and our patients.
Thank you, Sonia. Owen, over to you.
Hi, my name is Owen Pritchard. I lead the Local Government Association's Public Service Reform and Digital function. For those who don't know, the Local Government Association is the voice of local government within England. 3 words. About the blueprint, I'd say clear, bold vision.
Thank you. Concise, brilliant. And Emily, final word to you then on your opening welcome and 3 words.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm Emily Middleton, the Director General for Digital Centre Design within Government Digital Service in DCIT. And I led on the development of the new digital centre and on the blueprint for modern digital government, and now on implementation. I think my 3 words would be ambition, collaboration and transformation. And I choose those because, sort of like Owen, I think the sort of document is about sort of setting out that long-term ambitious vision, but it's also about making clear that for it to be realised, we need different ways of working, not just across central government, but indeed beyond, with organisations like the LGA, local government, wider public sector, and with the private sector too.
Thank you all. So good scene setter there. And Emily, I'm going to pick up on your sort of transformation word you pulled out there. So it's been 8 months now since the blueprint was published. How do you think progress is going? What would you point to in terms of some of the early wins?
Yeah, so I thought you might ask this. So look, since the blueprint was published in January, we've been kind of hard at work on sort of 2 main things, almost 3 main things really. The first is some of the kickstarters that were described in the blueprint. I've brought my copy here today, so you'll see sort of at the back there are sort of 5 kickstarters that we set out as sort of ways of things that we can just kind of get on with, show progress, show direction of travel. So I'll talk through those in a moment. The other thing we've been doing is looking at how can we make inroads into some of those more systemic issues that we know hold back progress, sustained progress over the long term. And those are the 5 things that were identified in the State of Digital Government review that I know was referenced in the previous panel, which found that some of the real root causes for why we might not have gone further and deeper in digital transformation of the state, on things like the state of sort of digital leadership, how we approach talent, how we approach funding models, and the sort of lack of ability to sort of measure as well. So we've both been trying to make some rapid progress in the short term on things that will really make a difference to citizens and to productivity of the state, as well as starting to tackle some of those long-term issues. So just to give you some examples then, on some of those kickstarters, one, we said that we were going to work on a gov.uk app, and I'm really pleased to say the public beta is out. Please do download it if you haven't already. Give us feedback. That's what good betas are all about, as you know. The wallet is also in development, and more coming on that in the autumn. We also said we were going to trial a new way of working with different departments, taking the case of people who are managing long-term health conditions, chronic conditions as an example. So we've been doing work with the Department for Work and Pensions, as well as the Department for Health, other parts of the NHS, to look at how we can better organise kind of content and assistance, make it easier to find online for those sort of 3 million people who are economically inactive because of a health condition, and who at the moment typically have to navigate around 40 different services from 9 different organisations. So what can we do working together relatively quickly to make things easier for them? And so that work is underway. You can read a blog post that we published about it in June. We also mentioned work on chat, so how we can look at navigating, helping users better navigate the now more than 700,000 pages of content on gov.uk using a chatbot. So that's also under development. We've already done, we did a sort of small beta late last year, and more on that in the autumn. And then on skills, and I'm sure this will come up as a big theme today, it's something that I'm personally really passionate about. We talked about how we were going to do a trial of giving opportunities for civil service data scientists to get the opportunity to kind of upskill to become machine learning engineers. And just a few months ago, we graduated the first cohort of that scheme. Incredible reviews. We are totally oversubscribed, as you can imagine, sort of for the next iteration of that. So that's just one of many things we're doing in the talent space. And then finally, we also have a real focus in the blueprint on those firmer foundations, and a focus on stronger cybersecurity and tech resilience. And one of the things we said we'd do was to set up a cross-government vulnerability scanning service, and to do that once and well for government rather than lots of different organisations doing their own. And similarly, again, I'm really pleased to say that that is now set up and underway. I could go on, I won't, but you know, there's also lots in terms of how we're looking at tackling kind of reforming funding models for digital services, and also public procurement that we can perhaps get into later in the discussion.
Fantastic, thank you, Emily. Got a lot there on your plate, and great to hear that skills is a sort of centrepiece for that focus. You know, we talk a lot in Cisco about there's no point digitising citizen services if citizens can't engage with those services in a way that is digital first. So thank you for that. Owen, let me come to you just to sort of step back a little bit now from a local government perspective. What do you consider to be the fundamentals that need to be put in place? And perhaps when you're considering that, just set the scene for us on some of the environments that you're facing in local government. How is that put together? And then what are you doing to sort of really tackle those fundamentals?
Yeah, sure. So I think, first off, what is local government is important to understand, because a lot of people know it exists but don't really sort of understand it. And in England, it's local government is worth over 120 billion a year. It's about 317 councils, employs about 1.4 million people. It delivers, depending on how you count them, about 1,000 services for just about every government department. And it holds data on just about every resident in the UK. Now, if you think of those services that it delivers, again, depending on how you count them, about sort of only 15% of them probably are to our lead government department, MHCLG. The rest are to the other big players like DWP, like Health and Social Care, like DFE. So it's a complex environment, right? And for each of those vertical services that it's trying to deliver for the residents, it is then subject to or beholden to a bunch load of horizontals. So the data standards that local government has to pay attention to are the data standards of the entire public sector. So the idea of within the sort of digital ecosystem, when one considers local government, you're speaking about the public sector as a whole. And I think what was wonderful about the sort of publications that came out over the last sort of 12 months, really, the State of Digital Government and the Blueprint for Digital Government, is that it's the first time in in my time that fact has been acknowledged, right? There were 29 mentions of local government in the State of Digital Government, right? And for local government dweeb like me, that matters, right? Because traditionally people use the terms government, central government, public sector interchangeably when they're not. And recognising the size, the scope and the complexity of local government, which is very much the glue that kind of binds so much of the public sector together, is critical. Now, in the submission that we did for the State of Digital Government, which is the sort of sister publication to the blueprint of digital government, we highlighted many of the challenges that we face. And there'll be no surprise to anyone here that legacy tech, technical debt, locking, data standards, lack of skills, the way that we do financial planning, all those things. And it's important to think of them in the scope of where we are and what we're trying to achieve. So for those who think like me in pictures, I'm just going to paint a 2x2 at the moment, is if you imagine on the left, you talk about foundational technology, and on the right, you talk about innovation. At the bottom, you talk about challenges, and at the top, you talk about opportunities. So much of what we need to fix is in the bottom right. So it's that technical debt, legacy tech, skills, standards of data. But so much of our conversation right now is being drawn to the top right, the opportunities that are coming from AI and from data and so forth and emerging technology. And we've got to realize that if we, and I think there's been wonderful work in this place, but if we're to do more than just take the low-hanging fruit of large language models and innovative tech in the immediate next couple of years and actually move on into the future and make the most of this emerging technology, we need to fix those foundations. So to leave with a slightly trite analogy, I'm afraid, is that you cannot drive F1 cars on dirt track roads, right? And we've got to fix the roads if we're going to make the most of emerging technology. I'm confident for the first time in the years I've been doing this that the central government gets this for the first time. So I'm looking forward to working.
I can see a lot of nods on your sort of panel members here. I don't know, Sonia, whether you want to come in on that point around the fundamentals.
Yeah, so quite consistent with Owen, where, you know, if there's anything about driving the advancement of kind of how we use technology in the future, kind of AI, be it quantum, actually fundamentally it's trying to make sure you've got the kind of brilliant basics. So kind of we've, in the NHS, have grown up with technology, and we're now in a space where actually it's pretty crowded, and there's also some gaps because it's so crowded. And we know that in some parts of the country is an absolute wonderful service they're receiving, and in some not. So we need to make sure that not only are we levelling up our technology, foundational technology, making sure it's secure and hardened for the future in terms of the advancements of AI, but also to ensure that actually fundamentally it also supporting and reducing inequity of care as well. So for us, the actual blueprint for modern government was a real catalyst for change. So I don't know if it's a direct causal effect, but we have certainly found that analog to digital is a mainstay shift for the NHS 10-year plan. It's not in the basement. It's not an accompanying guide. It's actually a mainstay, and it reads across in terms of how we'd like to provision. And actually, our understanding from what we've determined is actually there's a 2% productivity unlock if we get this right. So with the record investment that we're getting over the next spending review, we've got to make sure we're using that public pound wisely to actually deliver the benefits. So our first taste of this is with the NHS app. Some of you may have had experience of using our NHS app recently, but actually that's now getting more users a month than Netflix. So it just shows that actually there is a pull more than ever from our public to use digital services in a way that supports their well-being, their healthcare and access to services.
And I'm a big user of the NHS app, and it works beautifully, so thank you for that. And I think we saw a shift, didn't we, during COVID, that people were more willing to interact digitally out of necessity, frankly. But if we sort of stay with you, Sonia, on your kind of hopes for the future then, and what good looks like building on this foundation now in sort of 5-10 years' time, what would good look like? What are you aspiring to there?
So as we're working through sort of the underpinning almost strategy and work streams to take forward the analog to digital mission. There are three shifts, because we like shifts. So we're taking forward 3 shifts. One, around moving to the person-centred architecture, so really around re-architecting the technology estate, which is currently organisationally bounded, which then gives us issues around kind of data provision, how we share data, and actually moving to a more pathway-based, people-centred approach in terms of how we organise the estate. The second is actually moving the NHS infrastructure to become digital public infrastructure, so resetting the market dynamics that we have. So it would be fair to say the NHS are becoming better buyers, but I think we could be better. And also making sure that we're providing more clarity and consistency to the market around where enterprise providers are likely to play in the future market, but also where we're going to enable growth either through innovation for our small to medium enterprise partners. And in that, just providing much more clarity and consistency over a longer period of time in terms of our agenda as well. And then the last for us is the shift in the operating model for the NHS. If we are genuinely going to build and support wider government with building smarter state, we need to also reorganise ourselves to be able to meet that challenge as well, both in the way that we organise ourselves around kind of product delivery. So that for us is a really big strategy, is actually rather than do it around services or particular technologies, how do we build around products and people, ensuring that we're organising the services, because most of you will feel that the NHS is one, but as you know, much like the LGA, it's a distributed set of organisations that are trying to deliver the best healthcare possible for our nation. So making sure that we're organising and clear on roles and responsibilities at every layer of the NHS, and making sure that we're getting best value in terms of the way that we organise ourselves for technology delivery.
Fantastic, thank you, Sonia. We've talked about some of the fundamentals then that need to be put in place. We've talked about our hopes, ambitions, priorities, progress made so far. It's now the moment where we talk about AI, of course we are, because clearly AI is not the answer to everything, we know that, but we know that it has a role to play in helping us with some of these accelerations that we hope for by way of transformation. So perhaps, Emily, if I start with you, what are your sort of hopes around how AI can help us drive that momentum and pace around some of the ambitious things that you're trying to achieve on the back of the success that you've had so far?
Yeah, of course. So we've certainly been accelerating our work in this space over the past months within GDS, and we've been collaborating really closely with departments and beyond who are sort of doing the same. And so there's two things that I think are particularly interesting here. One is some of the kind of use cases around AI are in and of themselves really impressive and really exciting, even if at the moment they're quite often, specific kind of point solutions. So to give you one example that the Prime Minister announced in June is a tool that our own AI incubator team, i.ai, built called Extract. And what that does is it converts sort of old planning documents, even those, from the 1800s, handwritten, been written over, faded, into very, very quickly into digital information, saving, planning officers, hundreds, thousands of hours of time in finding the right documents, but also kind of doing that kind of conversion themselves. And in the use of that technology, Google DeepMind have sort of said this is amazing. So in and of it also just sort of shows that we can innovate really well, sort of in government, in the public sector, which is great. But I think it also helps capture the imagination of senior leaders who are maybe not sort of digital natives, and I think it helps sort of open up a bit of a conversation and a focus on sort of the role that technology, but also new operating models, foundations, all the things we've talked about can bring to transforming our public services. So I very much partly also see some of these AI use cases as, if you like, being like the thin end of the wedge for everything else we need to do. And I don't think we should be ashamed of that. I think we should lean into that. The other piece, I think, though, that is in development, that's a bit longer term, that was announced in August, is sort of following some money we were awarded in GDS in the spring statement for kind of AI frontiers. We're starting work on on thinking about not just how we might use a sort of a chatbot for gov.uk that I mentioned earlier, but how might we sort of push that further and with the use of agentic technology. So imagine you're a young person looking for jobs, training opportunities, trying to navigate all the different help that you might be able to get from different parts of government. Imagine having an AI agent that can not just sort of synthesize the information and give you the right links, but actually is sort of executing a series of sort of application forms or other sort of tasks on your behalf. So I think it's incumbent on us as the digital centre of government to be leaning into this technology and to be safely, securely, responsibly and transparently innovating on that, indeed with, often with private sector partners. So those are two of the sort of angles that we've been pursuing and that I'm really excited about.
Thank you. And Owen, how about you? How are you considering the use of AI with a sort of local government focus?
Yeah, so as I touched on a moment ago, I think we're going to go through phases, and I think we're in the initial phase of early adoption, low-hanging fruit, and I think what we need to do in this phase is make sure that we are consistent in the adoption of that low-hanging fruit, that actually what we see. So I commend to you all that you go on the LGA AI Hub, all right, and you'll see a list of case studies there of the wonderful stuff that's going on within councils already. And that includes digital front doors for family services, AI road maintenance, robots, shared planning services in Greater Cambridge and the like. And there's a lot of stuff going on in that space. But we've got to fix those foundational stuff before then we go to the next level of what is AI going to go do for us beyond that, and what are we going to get out of those things. And I think in reality, if we do get that data standards right before we move on to the next level, over the next sort of 5-10 years, we're going to see real innovation in what I think will be the sort of efficacy of local government in actually preventative service delivery, in the efficiency of local government in the way that it tackles middle office and back office functions, in the engagement levels, how it communicates with its communities, and AI will enable all of that. But if we're to be innovative, I think there's one thing that we've got to do, and that's get the right people in the room together. And for me, it's easy when I sit in this stage, I can speak to you a little about local government, I can speak to you a little about tech, but the truth is I'm not a systems engineer and I'm not a social worker. If we want to actually get the most innovative use of digital technology, we have to get people with not just declarative knowledge like me, but procedural knowledge into the rooms together, right? And that is the people on the front line speaking to the developer, the systems developer, the software developer. That is going to take a change in behaviors. We're going to have to push that innovation out into the regions, into the front line, and actually put these people in contact and be innovative. And there's wonderful collaborations going on. We see Tesla and Grow or whatever the case may be, but we've got to take that and have a cultural reset in the way that we do it and actually put these people at the forefront of our innovation. And I think that's how we'll make the best use out of AI.
And a potential AI bot, Owen, for potholes, maybe?
Yeah, there's one. Look, it's funny you should say that. Hertfordshire County Council. So there you are. For all of those who are concerned about potholes, have a look at Hertfordshire County Council's work.
If you live in Hertfordshire, there's a new hobby for you to take up. Excellent, thank you. So lots of innovative ideas there, and I'm sure, we know that the NHS is experimenting with AI for better healthcare outcomes. So much to do, lots of sort of spinning up a proof of concepts. What are you seeing, Sonia? What are your hopes for how AI can help supercharge some of this transformation for healthcare?
So over the last sort of 20 years, this is the first time where I'm seeing a real pull from the workforce around actually opportunities to use their AI. So in some cases, some really practical things, how can they get through their admin tasks faster, all the way to, some of you may have seen on kind of the media, the use of sort of ambient voice to help our clinicians with admin tasks, freeing up more time to actually spend on a one-to-one basis with their patients. So some real opportunities to actually reset the relationship between sort of the healthcare provider and patients. And we're also seeing opportunities in our operational efficiencies as well. So from a technology delivery perspective, using things like AI for legacy remediation or vibe coding, it's becoming more normal practice as well. So that's creating an efficiency factor, all the way from some really exciting things where we know that actually the public health foundation is just as important as creating the NHS and supporting them in the service as well. So what AI can do in terms of early detection and early diagnosis of diseases, so actually we're kind of treating the public health space side of things to support the nation. There are really exciting opportunities, but underlying this, there's kind of three things, I think. We talked about the estate. Like, we need to get the foundations right. They need to be strong, sturdy, clear data standards. Running AI across a fragmented estate is just prone to risks. The second is education. So whilst we get familiar with it, there are also considerations around how you're using the AI. Is it sovereign? You know, where is the data being held? Those considerations were actually, they used to be quite a lot for the technology professionals to kind of worry about. This is now a board level conversation in terms of where do we take AI, what's the kind of capital or IP on the knowledge that we might be sharing, all the sensitivity of information that we might be sharing as well. So making sure that we're really thinking through that. And also ethics. So from our perspective, there's this kind of ethical challenge around, well, if we are using AI to process what is kind of sensitive or patient information, you know, is that right in terms of kind of prejudging an outcome for an individual based on sort of the limited data or data that you have? So there's some real ethical concerns about how far do you take AI, particularly agentic AI, in terms of the ethical space as well. So lots of opportunity, but peppered with lots of kind of considerations as we take those steps forward.
Thank you. I was part of an Oxford debate about the ethics of AI, and they were talking about, you know, when should you use it, when shouldn't you use it? And the topic of neurodiversity came up. And actually, there were some amazing use cases where AI was able to interact with patients in a way that was more in tune to them. And it was really challenging the sort of concept of, should you always have a human one-to-one? And could there be places where an AI could tap into other ways to connect with someone that perhaps, if you don't have that vantage point yourself, could be a way to unlock that person and their health journey. So it's a fascinating topic, the ethics one. So many sort of grey, blurred lines. Leadership, I'm going to move on to that. And I've got a few more questions here for the panel, and then I'm going to come to the audience. So please be thinking about some questions that you would like to ask. So let me carry on then with the topic of leadership, because, you know, we've all talked about some ambitious plans here across central health and local government. And these things don't happen by accident. They happen through planning, skills, momentum, but at the top of all of these things is leadership and driving that change. So structurally, Emily, I'm going to come to you first perhaps to consider this question. How do you put in place those structures to give leadership the responsibility but also the scope to operate in a way that enables that pace of change?
Yeah, it's a good question. So part of what we kind of set out in the blueprint was an expectation that by end of next year, every public sector organisation should have a digital leader on their board, on their sort of executive committee, and a digital lead non-exec as well. And I think we've made really good kind of progress on that, and we'll be sort of talking about that more soon. But I think that almost the more interesting question, I think this is sort of what you were hinting at, is how do we get all the other leaders feeling like also and acting like they're digital leaders, and then enabling our teams to work in a really multidisciplinary way across organisational boundaries, which we know is really important for a lot of the change that we're trying to deliver. And I think on that count, I've been really sort of heartened by the level of interest we've had since publishing the blueprint, and particularly sort of since some of our, I think some of our AI work and our other public-facing work has really helped with this, the level of interest we've had from leaders across the public sector who are not the usual suspects, who see themselves as sort of policy director generals, who see themselves as in different sorts of delivery roles, and there are all kinds of networks springing up, and I think those informal networks are just as important as those sort of formal structures that you mentioned. We do, of course, have a sort of a leadership group of digital non-executives across government who are really important, both for acting as a sounding board for us in the digital centre, but also for folks in departments and kind of helping catalyse that change. We have various groups of officials who gather. For instance, we have a really active AI leaders group which met the other week. Every single department was represented at a senior level, and it wasn't just chief digital information officers there. It's sort of people who are leading on sort of change or policy or whatever in a transformation within their departments. So those are the sorts of groups we're investing in as well. And then I think what I'd say finally is that, where the blueprint sort of set out a long-term vision and ambition, some sort of first steps, some reforms that we kind of want to see through over the long term. What we are now following it up with, coming later in the autumn, is a digital roadmap. And so it's a bit of the delivery plan over the next spending review period that will also kind of set out some sort of metrics for how we want to sort of measure progress. And so I'm hoping that provides an extra, to your question, bit of a sort of framework as well as another sort of catalyst for leaders to kind of get on with delivering some of those transformative changes, both on the foundations, kind of cross-government, as a bit Owen was as alluding to, but also kind of within specific domains, whether that's sort of within health, building on the 10-year health plan, or whether that's in education or other areas.
And I think that is key, isn't it? You have your sort of leaders at the top end of the organisation, but then to hear the voices from those user groups and have a combined set of influencers to drive that leadership and ownership at different levels of the organisation as well. So thank you for explaining that. Sonia, perhaps coming to you next then on this topic of leadership and ownership. How do you get, you explained about the sort of how the NHS is structured and how at a trust level there's a lot of autonomy. So what would you point to there in terms of best practice for leadership structure and getting everybody moving in that same direction?
So we have created levers and signals to kind of nudge the system in terms of making sure that they have the kind of digital leadership. So precursor to the model digital blueprint, we measure digital maturity across the NHS, have been for the last 3 years, and we have been actively measuring sort of leadership under sort of, is it well led? And the things that we signal there are, do they have a digital leader on the board? Do they have a non-executive with the portfolio for technology? And I'm really pleased that over the last 3 years, we've seen sort of a 25% increase in terms of digital presence on the board. So we've still got a way to go, which means that I think we're about 60 to 70% there in terms of the estate. However, the job's not done once you've got the digital leader. And much to Emily's point is we've got to ensure that the boards own the digital agenda moving forward. So it really is board ownership, in the way that actually every board member has a level of confidence in terms of finance, in terms of people, leadership and management. I think digital needs to be equal in terms of kind of agenda, interest, confidence as well, because we found quite a lot of this was about knowledge building and building their confidence in this space as well. So we have been doing that work, but we've still got a journey to go as well, right? So I think AI will be a bit of a catalyst, because what we're seeing up and down the country is boards, chief execs demanding what is their AI strategy as well. So that, I think, will help us pull in the direction. But like we said, it's all about imbalance, making sure you've got the right foundations in place to support that kind of innovation and advancement in terms of capability that you can offer to both your workforce and also to your people as well. So super, super important. I also think we have a responsibility as technologist professionals as well around how we encourage that knowledge development, not just with leaders, but also with our wider counterparts in the service as well. So a lot more work to do there around actually just general education and knowledge sharing in order to take this agenda forward.
And on that topic of knowledge sharing, and it was great to hear Owen about the LGA AI Hub, so I'll definitely be checking that out. Sounds like we need something potentially broader on that across government, but
We have one.
Excellent.
Yeah, AI Knowledge Hub in collaboration with there's sort of local government examples.
It's got
on
good
that
examples
too,
of that.
and we point to each other. So AI Knowledge Hub, do search for it. We're continually updating
They copied
it.
us.
I can
We copy,
see.
yeah, exactly.
Moving on. Owen, so tell us a little bit about that then. And again, on the topic of leadership there across local government, what are some of the things you would point to as being fundamental, important, and helping everybody come along that same journey?
Yeah, I say this as a long-term advocate for local government, but this kind of strategic change can only come from central government, right? And I think that's really important, and I think to recognise that when you're talking about systems change, you're talking about the entire public sector. That can only come from central government. Only central government has the power and the mandate to be able to do that, right? And I think that's important to recognise from the outset. And when I think of leadership, I suppose I judge it by three things. I look at three things, which are governance, culture, and vision, because I think they're the conditions that good leadership sets. I think for the first time, again, I'll harp out for the first time in my time in local government, we have a vision now. We have a shared understanding of the state of digital government. We have the blueprint for digital government, and they're good. And the worst insult and best compliment I heard of the blueprint for digital government was that it was really obvious, right? And I think people just don't understand how difficult it is to write something that obvious about something this complicated. And I think that is a testimony to the amount of work that's gone into it. I know that they're looking at a roadmap to operationalise it and so forth now, and that will provide further clarity on that vision. So I welcome that. And I know, there's people like Ben Cheetham in the room from MHCLG who are looking specifically at our sector and how it's operationalised there. So I'm comfortable that that's all in play for the first time. I think when one looks at governance and vision, I think there's always a fine line between the principle of subsidiarity, of getting allowing innovation to grow, to getting the right people into the room, allowing things to happen, and the need for muscular intervention in standardization, in spend controls, in market interventions, right? And I say this as, I say this as an advocate for local government. Traditionally, local government has been a sector that says, let 1,000 flowers bloom, right? But there is a time now, we're at a moment with local government reorganisation, and for those who don't know, what we're expecting to see over the next 5 years is the number of councils cut in half, really, and become more similar to each other, rather than of three different types. And I think that provides people like Ben and people and others across central government an opportunity to really consolidate and create efficiencies, create standardisation in a way that we haven't seen before. And I think that should be welcomed, because if we get the efficiencies and the centralisation right in local government about what are the things that we can share, what are the things we can collectively procure, what are the things we can collectively build, that's going to leave more capacity and resource to focus on the things that are different, that are unique to places, right? And that's a real opportunity that I think that we need to seize. And I think it's going to be a function of leadership to get that right, that governance right, be muscular in standardization, spending controls, standards, centralized procurement, but be sufficiently confident in your place to allow innovation and experimentation to occur and realize that not every place is its own. And that links obviously into this cultural reset, right? The relationship between central government and local government is one of siblings, probably angry siblings, right? But it needs to get better, right? And it needs to get better through mutual understanding. And this isn't just about the tech space. There's a lot of sort of talk about, secondments and better understanding and so forth. And I think, how we get a central government to understand local government, its complexity and diversity, is something that we're going to have to work with. How we get the right people in the right room is something that we're going to have to continue to do. It's a never-ending battle. And I think if we get that culture right, if we get that governance right, we've got the vision in place. And I'm confident that for the first time in a number of years, that we're heading in the right direction over the next 5-10 years to see radical changes in local government and ultimately, most importantly, the public services that the communities and people receive from local government and the rest of the public sector.
Fantastic, thank you. So hopefully our audience here have had a little bit of time to think about some questions. Just while we've got the mic kind of roaming, we've heard a lot already today around the blueprint for digital transformation. We've talked about the importance of the fundamentals that need to be put in place, how AI can accelerate some of that transformation, and also the importance of leadership. And all of you had really great comments there about how to bring people on that journey and power the transformation and change. So we're going to take a pause and look to the room. Anyone brave enough? We have a question already. Thank you. Please.
Hi. Is it on? Hello? Oh, there we go.
Hello.
My name's Hannah Roden. I'm from Leeds City Council and Leeds ICB. A question for Emily, probably. I think right at the start you talked about the need to be both pro-workforce and pro-AI, and that conversation around reduction in entry-level roles and taking jobs away from people. I think my question is, particularly from a local government perspective, but across the public sector, how do we pay for AI without reducing headcount? Whether it's buying the tools in the first place or creating something ourselves or using something from IAI, just running the AI costs money. Where does that money come from when we've already got stretched budgets? We're being asked to show return on investment. Where's the benefit of us using this AI if we're not reducing headcount? Where does that saving come from? And also, just to pick up on something that was said in relation to that move to the preventative model of local government. Again, it's those funding models which you did mention about, potentially changing there. If that preventative model of care, that sits within local government. If we want to stop people ending up in hospital, that will come from local government. But the benefit is going to be felt more downstream within the NHS. So again, where is local government getting the funding from to be able to do that?
Thank you. So perhaps, Emily, if you go first, and then perhaps Sonia, you can come in on that point around the NHS.
Yeah, happy to start and then hand to you. Look, I think really good questions. I think as Owen said, I think in many ways we're still in the foothills of this, and I think that's why we as well as sort of working really closely with public sector reform colleagues in the Cabinet Office have placed a real emphasis on taking a test and learn approach. And I think we need to make sure that there are sort of funding models that are allied to that. So we're not making massive investments now in things that we don't know exactly how they're going to play out and how they're going to work and what the impacts are going to be. I also think there's sort of lots of areas where we're seeing where parts of the public sector are struggling to retain and recruit staff sort of fast enough, or where actually by using productivity tools we can free up staff time to do sort of other kind of higher value add things. So that's certainly where we're sort of placing our focus. But I think it also goes to Owen's point of how we develop and use AI needs to kind of involve people who are at the front line. And one of the things you mentioned, you were from Leeds, I think City Council, which is great. We hosted, in collaboration with colleagues from local government, from MHCLG, in sort of April, May this year, a hackathon. You were there. Amazing. Fantastic. It was great, right? I mean, we hosted a hackathon, 150 people looking at how AI can improve the planning process, tackle backlogs, tackle different sort of steps of the process. And the thing that I thought was fantastic about that, we had people represented from local government and planning specialists all over the country, many of whom were doing this sort of day in, day out, and pairing them with technologists to really work intensively over 2 days and looking at kind of different solutions. And we've, those a bunch of those have sort of been presented and are being actively explored by MHCLG and by others. And I think it's also, we need to make sure that that sort of way of working isn't the exception. It becomes the sort of default if we're going to, crack some of the issues that you highlight.
And before we move on to the sort of healthcare one in particular, Owen, you were nodding there, so you must come across these sorts of challenge statements all the time. Anything you want to add to some of the things Emily brought out?
Yeah, sure. So, really tough questions, Hannah. Thank you. I turned to Emily and said, I'm glad you got that. So a confession. I was formerly a deputy leader of a council. I was an elected councillor, and I was a cabinet member for finance. And I remember sitting on an event not dissimilar to this, talking about how we get better at making the case for investment within an MTFS cycle where the constraints are always in the next year, right? And I think some of the argument that to simplify, I think there are really important parts, 2 or 3 really important arguments. One is generally the case for investment versus immediate need, right? And that's a hard case to make very often when there's a pressing need. And that isn't just about tech. That's actually about wider types of investment as well, right? The second is to make a strong case for preventative care, increased efficacy versus efficiencies, right? Because too often when people look at financial issues, they look for cost cuts rather than effect gains, right? And again, that's a really complex issue. And then the final bit is about the complicatedness and the complexity of place-based. Earlier when I talked about declarative versus procedural knowledge, I'm talking about the difference between you and I. I've been out of a frontline council for a number of years, and Leeds as a place and the interconnectedness of that place and the impact of housing on your social care bill or whatever the case may be in those spaces. Now, the reality is, over the past few years, we've heard many innovative ideas, everything from a digital DEL to go along CDEL and RDEL to promote investment, to more obvious tools to help people like you with business cases, to tell the stories to the cabinet members, to the 151 officers, to give people the case studies and the exemplars to show, and the case studies aren't there just for novelty value. They're there to make cases to your 151 officer, so the chief financial officer within the council, and the cabinet member of finance to show that these things can be done. But I think there's a bigger question in how we tackle place-based services, right? And I think the central government is doing interesting work in this. Yeah, I look at Tesla and Grow coming out of the Cabinet Office, which is arguably about methodology, but also making a case to central government that place-based dynamics can work in changing it. And it's really a proof of concept for arguably the Treasury being the main audience as to how these things can work. Then there's an increased emphasis on neighbourhoods and how we do neighbourhood planning, right? And preventive care within social care, but also within MHCLG. There's a long-standing school of thought, for those who've heard of it, called Total Place, right? Which is about the devolution of place-based budgets. And that's got to be part of this solution, is that we've got to look and we've got to empower. I talked earlier about the difference between centralisation and subsidiarity, and we've got to be more confident, even though the leadership comes from central government, it's got to be more confident in how it delegates finance to tackle the whole in an area. And I believe that passionately, with all my heart, that concept of subsidiarity, of trust, of devolution of budgets to tackle a whole ecosystem. And I will end with, I wasn't sure I was going to use this, but it's a really trite analogy, but I love trite analogies, so I'm going to go with it, right? There's a there's a forest in Utah, right, which is 100 acres, right, and it's full of aspen trees, 47,000 aspen trees, right, and they're all about 80 meters high, and for those who don't know about the aspen, it grows straight as a die, okay? So when you're above and you're looking at it, you see these 47,000 trees all growing really straight. And then there's this discovery made just over a decade ago that this was not 47,000 trees. This was one ecosystem, this was one organism, and they were all offshoots, right? And that's what it feels like sometimes when you're at the front edge. You're at below the tree level and you're surrounded by this interconnected system. But the people above it just think that they've got these levers and these single services, and they don't see that you're working in a really complicated space. And I think I go back to the culture issue, we've got to persuade, tell better stories to central government, imbue trust in central government so they give us the delegated powers to do more at a place-based level. And that's part of the argument that I'm trying to make. So a long answer, I'm afraid, but a complicated question.
Thank you. A very complex question. You've touched on there a little bit around the preventative sort of care piece, which I think was the root of the question. Sonia, any final builds?
Keep it brief. So from an economic point of view, and particularly our health economics, we've got a rising population, increasing demand on our health services, and actually the complexity of our population that we're serving is increasing as well. That's in a backdrop of workforce shortages, and actually to meet the existing demand doing the same thing is not the solution to the future. So we both need to look at sort of our allocative efficiency. So are we using our workforce in the right spaces to treat? But also we've got to think about actually shifting our efforts into prevention. Otherwise, we're just going to see demand at the same scale and not being able to kind of change the profile of our healthcare services. Now, that on a macro scale actually makes sense, but your feedback to us is actually how does that square locally with the kind of pressures and challenges that you have in terms of delivery of services. So it's going to require strong collaboration and partnerships. And I genuinely believe the next stages of what we take forward in terms of creating this digital society will be on the strengths of our partnerships. We're going to have to make some serious trade-offs. So as we have organisationally kind of surrounded us, well, we've got this pot of investment and we have a pot of investment here, and one partner will, from a change that another partner might make, we've got kind of wins and losses in that. I think very much we do need to think about place-based strategies and how places come out and what are the outcomes they're driving for their population. So that is going to really require quite a big change as we move forward in terms of sort of kind of how we've traditionally worked, in terms of kind of verticals, in terms of trying to create that kind of collaborative horizontal relationships where actually the person and the people are the outcomes you're driving for, rather than sort of kind of trying to keep. So welcome Emily's work on trying to look at the reform agenda around future financial models, because I think that will be fundamental from taking where we are now, AI conceptually being really good and we're taking careful consideration and experimentation, to actually becoming a mainstay way of delivering our healthcare services.
Thank you, Sonia. So we are out of time, but I'm going to just ask you all very briefly, please, just for a final word of action. So what would your call to action be to this group and potentially to each other? Emily, I'll start with you.
I think it's where there are opportunities, challenges that are interconnected. Let's look at how we can, gather teams, work across boundaries. It might not be a hackathon, it might be something else, joint teams, different ways of working, to actually try a different way of sort of tackling those issues and kind of show what else is possible using technology.
Thank you. Owen?
Probably be bold, be collaborative, and work to understand places.
Thank you. Sonia?
For me, I think the ambition of delivering a smarter state, I think, will live or die on partnership working.
Fantastic. Great synergies there to close this down. So thank you to our panellists, Sonia, Owen and Emily. Round of applause.